Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us again. This is Friday Reflections. My name is Peter Bolland, and you are here with us on SanDiegoOasis. And we do this every Friday from 10 to 10:30-ish. And a special hello to all the new folks who are checking us out for the first time today or checking out this particular program for the first time. Welcome and glad to have you. If I haven't met you before, by day, I'm a philosophy and humanities professor at Southwestern College, where I'm also the department chair, and I just turned in grades a couple days ago, so my spring semester, as odd as it was, is now complete. And I'm sliding into summer, and I'm excited because in my partnership with Oasis, this wonderful community of learners and teachers and all the people behind the scenes who actually built it and run it, and unbelievable hours of love and work go into creating this, what is now essentially a virtual experience. And we want to talk to you more about that as we consider ways to roll back out into some sort of physical format. When and how that happens, we're not clear, nobody knows. So stick around, and at the end of the program today around 10:25, we'll ask you a few polling questions just to see where your thoughts are on some of those kinds of things. So what Friday Reflections is just a chance for you and I to kind of touch base with each other virtually in this Zoom arena, and not replace what we used to do, which was to get into big rooms and think through these things, but to create a new experience that is neither a replacement or a diminishment of what we used to do. You know, there are things that we miss about being together, but you know what? There are things about this platform that enable us to do things that we were not able to do before. And one of the exciting things that's rolling in the Oasis world right now is the idea of going national with a coalition of building some of these cities. There are oases in many cities, and more on this later, but if I could leak just a little bit of this now, there is a building and budding alliance between these far-flung oases communities to create some national things. Why not? I mean, it's a webinar, right? Why can't you? I mean, literally anybody in the world could be on this webinar right now. Last week we had people from Europe, from all over the United States on this Friday Reflections last Friday. So the sky's the limit, and it's all up to you. It's what you want to experience, the kind of programs you want to engage in and learn from and share with and build your own life through. And that's what I'm doing here too. I'm not, some expert doling out the secrets. I'm a lifelong student like you guys. I just decided that my job was going to be to stay a student forever and be in the classroom forever, just get up in front and think through things with the folks that come into the room, and think through things with the folks that come into this virtual space. So that's why I'm excited about Friday Reflections. And also one last program note, and then let's get down to it. Some of you know this. This is our 9th Friday in a row, I think. And this is also the last Friday in May. And it is also the last free Friday Reflections. We asked you all over the last couple of weeks, and over 95% of you said yes, I would be willing to contribute $5 and register for future Friday Reflections. Hey, we just do what we're told. So you told us that you'd be willing to do that. We can't run Oasis for free forever. It's unsustainable with that model. So we have to start charging some nominal entrance or registration fees for some of these things that we do. There will always be free programs too. But we are shifting in June to a $5 a session model for Friday Reflections. And over 90% of you said you were going to follow us into the new model. Let's see if that happens. I don't know. I hope so. June is kind of a big test for us. If it all crashes and burns in June, then Friday Reflections goes away and we all get back to our regular Friday mornings. But I would love to keep doing this with you. And so in order to keep this sustainable, when we're done here this morning, would you click on over to the Oasis website and register for next Friday? I think it's June 5th. And go ahead and register for all the Fridays in June if you feel so moved. That's the only way you're going to get the Zoom link. If you have paid and registered for a specific Friday reflection, then you'll get the email with that specific Zoom link that's only good for that one Friday. See, when we've been running this thing like wide open, we've all been using the same link for 2 months. That's going away after today. Okay, I just wanted you to know all that. So sorry for all the program note stuff. Let's turn our attention to the real reason why we gather here, and that is to think through philosophically the challenges that we're living through right now, and to kind of unpack and think through these challenging times. Forefront in our mind, of course, is the racial unrest around the country today, and the back context to that is now a couple of months of COVID-19 pandemic and shutdown. So what was already a stressful, difficult situation has now ratcheted up. And as I've been in touch with some of my Black and African American friends and allies around the country, there is, I don't want to be hyperbolic, but my sense of it is that there is an unprecedented level of fear, grief, confusion, exhaustion, rage. And those of us who work in anti-racism work feel like we've been running in circles for a long time and keep coming to the same place. So that's in a lot of our minds too. We'll touch on some of that this morning, and we'll of course touch back on the COVID-19 pandemic stress as if that wasn't bad enough. But this isn't a current events program. I'm not CNN, right? We're doing something different here. And that is to see if there are some tools in the toolkit of philosophy that we can bring out and wield in order to begin to reconstruct justice, in order to repair our damaged, wounded minds and souls and hearts, and maybe rebuild our communities. Are there any tools in philosophy that we need right now? And I think there's a couple that I want to offer this morning. Last time we talked about tyranny and freedom, and I told the story about my paternal grandfather, Johannes Bolland, and his internment at Buchenwald. And I showed you some art. In fact, there it is right behind me, that tray there on the table that he made while he was imprisoned. And just the whole concept of what real tyranny looks like, right? The state kicking down your door, dragging you away, murdering you at will, no civil liberties, no rights of any kind. The horror of tyranny haunts us all. It's been a part of the human experience all over the planet since the dawn of humanity. Plato railed against it in his epic classic, The Republic, already 25 centuries ago. So the tyrant is a trope and a recognizable villain to us all, the one who wants to shut down and control the media, academia, science, research, the one who replaces all of that with their own whimsical notion of their self-aggrandizement. I'm not naming any names or anything, but just hypothetically, right? So that's on a lot of our minds these days. And today I want to kind of stay with that theme from last week of tyranny and freedom and focus more on the freedom side, the liberty side. And where does your freedom end and mine begin? That's always the tension when you start talking about liberty and freedom. The old trope that you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, right? So yes, we have the right to free speech. That's guaranteed in our founders' documents. You have the right to free speech. But no right is absolute. And that's key. No right is absolute. I cannot yell fire in a crowded theater. Why? Because it might create a stampede. People might be harmed. So speech that harms others explicitly is restricted speech. So, for example, in Germany, Nazi regalia is illegal. You cannot display a Nazi flag. I believe that's true in Belgium as well. And it might even be true in the UK. I didn't research this, I'm just kind of winging it here. But I do know that in Germany, after the war, after World War II, that symbology was outlawed. That is not protected free speech in Germany, because it is speech that harms. Whereas here in America, a bunch of neo-Nazis can stand in front of a synagogue and wave Nazi flags around all day, every day. And they will be protected by the police. That will be protected free speech. So you and I could debate if that is just free speech or if it is the incitement to anti-Semitic murder, which is in fact what the Nazi flag calls for, very plainly. And I could say the same about the stars and bars, the American Confederate flag, and all of that. So we could have a discussion about what kind of speech is protected and try to find that line between, well, we allow as much free speech as possible until it impinges on the liberty of others to not get killed, to not be harmed. So that's always the discussion when you're talking about rights. Now, in philosophy, there is a subcategory of philosophy called ethics, right? I think we all know this. And ethics, of course, concerns itself with questions of right and wrong, morality, good and bad, and what is justice, and standards, values. And so an offshoot of ethics is political philosophy, because politics is nothing more than the codification and manifestation of our values. How do we distribute housing? How do we distribute food? How do we distribute water? How do we distribute health care? We all remember the phrase, the right to life. It's right. It's in Jefferson's first crack at articulating all this stuff, the Declaration of Independence. I think he was 28 years old when he wrote that, and he sort of copied that line from the British philosopher John Locke, which said that we ought to have the right to life, liberty, and property. And Jefferson ditched the property thing, and he said we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But the right to life, a phrase, of course, latched onto by anti-abortion forces, yeah? But the right to life, doesn't that imply the right to health care? It's just a question. I'm not going to get on a soapbox here. That's not what we do in this program. I do that on social media. But here, I think it's an interesting question. What does the right to life mean if you are institutionally excluded from healthcare because you're poor? If healthcare is sold on the market as a commodity like tube socks and gasoline, if that's how you decide as a society, if that's the social contract you make, that we're going to sell healthcare, it's going to be sold by these for-profit entities and then into that come the tendrils of the insurance industry and lobby, and all of a sudden it's all quite unaffordable, and a lot of people are getting obscenely rich, and a lot of other people, Americans with the so-called right to life, are left to die. And so that is an ethical question, and that gets right into a political question. So in the arena of ethics, there's this interesting discussion I want to share with you about rights. And the assertion here is that there's two kinds of rights. I know a lot of us talk about, that's my right. But think about it this way now. Let's break rights into two subcategories. We're going to call the first one liberty rights. And we're going to call the second category of rights welfare rights. I don't mean welfare like getting a welfare check. I mean rights that look out for your welfare. And the first category is liberty rights. The right to not be interfered with, the right to be left alone. So let's take that first one, liberty rights, sometimes called negative rights, because we're removing as much hindrance as possible in negative rights, in liberty rights. So for example, I can travel from state to state in California without having to show my papers when I cross a state border. You know, that's a liberty right. I have the right to free speech. I can write a letter to the editor and claim all kinds of things. Apparently, I can go on Facebook and make all kinds of false claims. And Mark Zuckerberg, the guy that runs Facebook, says, not my job to police fake news. Maybe you saw on Twitter today and yesterday that the President of the United States is having his tweets flagged as fake news, as false information, or the one from last night and this morning, the glorification of violence, when he tweeted about the racial unrest in Minneapolis. When the looting starts, the shooting starts. So Twitter said, I'm sorry, Mr. President, but you can't say that on our platform. And he's saying, it's free speech, it's free speech. But a quick look at the Constitution, at the Bill of Rights, any grade schooler can tell you that private corporations are not bound by free speech statutes. Only the government is. The government cannot control speech, but a private corporation certainly can. The newspaper is not required to print my letter to the editor. They can ditch it or print it. So I do not have freedom of speech on Twitter to say whatever I want. But I have freedom of speech in a lot of other arenas. So that's the liberty right, right? The right to be left alone, to have my money be left alone. Don't come after me for excess taxation. Taxation should be free. That's a liberty right, to have minimal interference in my life. Okay, then there's the second category of right, welfare rights or positive rights. These are the rights to receive something. So for example, we in our society, the way we've arranged it, I have the right to fire department protection. My house catches on fire, a big truck rolls up, a bunch of guys and a bunch of people come out and save my house, and they don't bill me. So that's a welfare right. There are numerous other examples of welfare rights where you have the right to receive something. But you can see now the tension between welfare rights and liberty rights. The more liberty rights you have, the fewer welfare rights you have. And the more welfare rights you have, the fewer liberty rights there are. It's like two large guys like me on a teeter-totter, on a seesaw, in a playground. One goes up, the other goes down. If you have a social democracy like Iceland, like the Netherlands, like throughout Scandinavia, where there is a very thorough social net, where there are almost no homeless people, because there's a base salary and there is, health care, and there are lots of ways for you to not fail in your life, because there's this decision by the society, like, we're going to build a net so that nobody can fall through. But the taxation is going to be higher. So that's the trade-off. And then on the libertarian political side, they want to, minimize taxation and leave people alone as much as possible. So to put it in very sort of simplistic terms, my dog is barking. That's my dog, not your dog. So there is, in simplistic terms, on the libertarian side, you have the favor of liberty rights. I guess that makes sense, right? And on the left-wing side, the more Democrat or socialist perspective, you have the favoring of welfare rights. So just to bring all that home around the question that we're discussing about, what do we owe one another? And maybe thinking about rights in a little more of a sophisticated way. Like, do I have the right to go to the grocery store with my mask on in a time of pandemic when all the leading infectious disease experts on earth are recommending highly that we wear face masks, not to protect others from us? Excuse me, I said that backwards. Not to protect me from others, but to keep my lung cloud of vapor right here in my beard instead of in the aisle that you're trying to walk down. Wearing masks slows the spread of COVID-19. That's widely understood, outliers aside. So when I go to the grocery store, Do I have the right to be free of your lung cloud? Or does your liberty right to not wear a mask in the grocery store trump my right to not breathe in your lung fumes? This is where the tension always is in a free society where we try to navigate all of these questions. We don't want to go too far to a restrictive totalitarian regime, nor do we want to go too far where it's a free-for-all and everybody do what they want. We're always struggling to find this middle path, and people are going to be mad on both sides about the decisions we strike. But that seems to be the best way. Was it Churchill who said that, democracy is a terrible form of government, but it's better than all the others? I think Plato kind of landed there as well 25 centuries before Churchill, that democracy has its failings. It's essentially mob rule. The greatest majority of the people are kind of in charge, and Plato warned us that a great percentage of that mass of people, how do I say this delicately, are a little uninformed. They don't know stuff. And so with straight up mob rule democracy, we have all kinds of additional challenges as well. What about the expertise? What about real knowledge that's only held by a certain elite group? How does that come down to folks like you and I who are just regular folks living our lives? So maybe Kant can help here, and this is my last little philosophical injection. Immanuel Kant, the 18th century Prussian German philosopher, he left behind for us something called the second formulation of the Categorical Imperative. You can look that up later. I'll tell you what it is. In fact, I'll read it to you in English, not in German. He says this is a principle that as moral beings we are bound to uphold. This is the second form of the Categorical Imperative. Kant wrote, "Act in such a way that you always treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, never simply as a means, but always at the same time as an end." Let me say that more clearly. Treat other people as an end in themselves, not a means to your end. So when you get on the bus to take the bus across town, the bus driver is a means to an end. She or he is going to drive that bus to your bus stop and you're going to get off. They are a means to an end, your end, namely your purpose, your goal, getting to your destination. But Kant argues that we as rational beings have a moral duty to treat that bus driver not just as a means to an end, but as an end in herself, as a being of infinite value. Not because God told us to, not because it's in some scripture. Kant does not address any of those potential sources. He says this is a rational law that reason alone imposes, that we are morally obligated to always act in a way that treats others as ends in themselves and not as means to an end. This is also sometimes called the principle of dignity. And I'm thinking of Confucius here because it's the same thing in Confucian philosophy, the dominant philosophical paradigm of East Asia, China, and all the rest of it. That we have zong, or duty, to mitigate our private desires and preferences and subjugate them to the good of the whole, and to bring Tien, the mandate of heaven, down to earth through our choices and actions. That's Confucius's vision of the ideal society, that each one of us is autonomous and free, but we must choose to become agents of Tien, of the good, of rightness. And it's the same argument Kant makes. So when Derek Chauvin, this Minneapolis police officer, had his knee in the throat of George Floyd, And I don't know if you saw the new video that came out last night from the other angle. There were three, I can't quite count them, at least three, maybe four police officers holding Mr. Floyd face down on the ground. He's already handcuffed. He's already been pacified. But one cop has two knees right in his chest, another one's on his legs. And then the guy that we see from the other camera angle, whose face we've all memorized now, Derek Chauvin, had his knee on the neck of George Floyd, who was calling for his mother and crying and involuntarily wetting himself because he knew he was being killed. He knew he was dying. And it is so obvious in horrific, extreme moments like that, that this police officer lost his way. I guess that's putting it as delicately as possible, isn't it? And that he was not treating Mr. Floyd as an end in himself, as a being of infinite value, but rather as chattel, as a subject of the realm, not as a citizen, not as a man like he wants us to regard him as. That breakdown in individual consciousness and in our collective consciousness is the nightmare that we are currently living in. And we see it in those horrific moments, like in the incident in Minneapolis, and we see it in the grocery store of the man who refuses to wear a mask and is yelling at the grocery store clerk or spitting on them in some cases because it's a free country, you can't tell me what to do, and that kind of often white privilege consciousness of you don't police me, I police you. And to me, when we look back in the concept of liberty rights and welfare rights, and when we look back at Kant's second categorical imperative, this moral duty that reason imposes on us, that we must treat all human beings as beings of infinite value. Do I need to say more? Regardless of race and gender, sexual orientation, and all of the rest. This is, of course, in perfect alignment with Christian principles and Buddhist principles and Muslim principles. All the religious and spiritual traditions affirm this idea. Jesus said, whatever you do to the least of these, you do to me. I don't know how more plain it can be said than that. And when it breaks down, it dehumanizes all of us. And I think that's why we feel like we feel today. Those of us watching this news who are scared, who are angry, who are confused, who feel exhausted. You know, 35%, when you have widespread COVID-19 testing, about 35% of us test positive. Most of that cohort will never become symptomatic. They won't get sick. But when you test positive, you are a carrier. You are an infection vector. Asymptomatic spread is what is keeping COVID-19 alive in this society. And so if you don't have any symptoms and you think, I'm fine, I'm not going to wear a mask, I'm going to start hanging out with my friends again, that's going to get us into a huge second wave later this summer, isn't it? And so your decision to socially distance, your decision to keep wearing a mask when you are in public, when you are outside the home, is, well, one way to frame it would be in this Kantian way, that I don't wear a mask for myself, but I want to treat the person who gets infected because of me, who I'll never meet, I'll never know their name, probably in some nursing home or in some prison. I want to treat that person whose name I don't know, whose face I will never see. I want to treat that stranger as a being of infinite value. And so I will wear a mask out of moral rectitude, out of moral obligation. This isn't a political position. It's not even a religious position for Kant. It's a simply rational position that we owe that to one another. So let me begin to wrap up here because I see the clock says we're about done. So What we're going to do now is put up a poll on the screen. And when we do, we would love your participation. So in a minute or so, when this poll pops up, use your touch screen if you got one, or use your mouse, and please respond to these questions. It'll take a minute or two for you to read through these. I think just 3 or so questions. Answer these questions for us. We would really appreciate it. And that helps us move forward and plan what we're going to be doing next and how best to serve what you want to do. So I'll play some polling music for you for a minute or so while you work on that. Then we'll get back together for some final words. So that's kind of what we do, in case you're wondering, by the way. That's kind of what we do the first 10 minutes of our time together. For those of you that come in right at 10, I'm playing, I call it hold music, you know. I'm just playing instrumental guitar for you guys while we're gathering, you know, and I'm watching the enrollment numbers. It goes from 20 to 30 to 40 to 60 to 80. We got up to 160 something today. So listen, thank you for that. And we're going to be putting the poll results up on the screen here in another minute or so that you can see what the answers were as soon as y'all are done answering the questions. Let me check a couple things here and then we'll, yeah. So while we're waiting for those poll results, I just wanted to plug a couple of things. We are going to be doing these Friday reflections in June, but as I mentioned at the top, thanks to your permission on this, we're going to begin requiring registration for each Friday. The login you used today for the Zoom meeting is not going to work after today anymore. So to continue with us on these Friday reflections, we're asking you to please go to the Oasis website and look in the catalog. You can search it by name. You can just search Bolland and find those and register and throw $5 in the basket. We appreciate your support. It's how we're going to keep this Oasis program running into the future, and we all want that. So thank you for your cooperation with that. We just really appreciate your support and your willingness to help us transition to a very low amount monetized version of Friday Reflections. Secondly, I want to, oh good, here's the polling results. Let's talk about that for a second. So restaurants have reopened. Have you visited a cafe or restaurant? 90% said no. Yeah, I'm with you. I haven't done it either. Let's look at the second question. Beaches are reopening next week for sit-down enjoyment. What are your personal plans? And looks like the biggest number is not going to the beach yet, sticking to my neighborhood walks for now. Yeah, I'm with you on that also. 3, Oasis is looking forward to seeing you at the virtual happy hour on Monday at 4. And we'll talk about our plans for the future. Are you joining us? And 54% not sure. A healthy 27% are like, I'm there with my wine. And you can see the rest of the numbers there yourself. So thank you so much for participating in that poll. Simona and the other decision makers, the leadership team at Oasis, make decisions based exactly on what you say. And so we need your input like that. Thank you. Real quick, and then we'll wrap up here. I've got 2 longer full-length webinars coming up in June I want to share with you. On June 16th, I'm doing something called the Wisdom of Kabbalah, and that is Jewish mysticism. We're going to do that on June 16th at 10 o'clock. So that's going to go from 10 to 11, and then at 11 to 11:30, Q&A, kind of like we did the 4 agreements. I think we all liked the way that worked out. An hour presentation, you write your questions in the Q&A box down there, and I get to as many of them as I can. So the Wisdom of Kabbalah on June 16th, register for that. And then at the end of June, June 30th, another Tuesday, we're doing something called Dismantling Racism, One Insight at a Time. And I'm really looking forward to that one, and especially in light of everything that's going on. Look, I'm not an expert. In fact, I'm a little bit late to the game, and my wife Lori and I have been committed to an anti-racism educational program for these last few years. And that means reading a lot of books that were recommended to us, watching films, getting together in discussion groups with both white people and Black and African American people and mixed groups of people. And I want to just share a little bit about my journey into what I'm thinking of as white allyship. You know, what does it mean when you start to learn more and more about systemic racism, about all the ways in which our society disadvantages some and advantages people that look like me. So I just really encourage you to be open to this. I promise I'm not going to shame anybody. This isn't about making white people feel bad. Got no time for the guilt. But we do see before us, I think, an opportunity to wield our access and our advantage for good. I don't think silence is good enough anymore. I don't think good intentions is good enough anymore. I don't think being a nice person is good enough anymore. We just keep circling this horrible circle. And I want to do a little bit what I can with a lot of other people who are a lot better at it than I am, but I want to share my particular slice of this process, what I've learned, about what you and I really can do to dismantle racism. It's not hopeless. Don't despair. Don't give up and retreat into your comfortable life. Be willing to be uncomfortable with me. We'll do it together. So that's Dismantling Racism on June 30th. All right, I went over time. One of these days, I'm really going to do a 30-minute Friday Reflections. Tune in next week to see if I do that. So thank you all again for gracing us with your support for these first 9 or so weeks that we've done it one way. And thank you in advance for helping us transition into a new way of doing Friday Reflections. Go to the website and register as soon as we're done here for June 5th, the next Friday Reflection. Thank you all so much. Thanks, Simona, and everybody behind the scenes at Oasis. And I'll see you all at the next thing. See you on the other side.